Tutankhamun, who has been dead for 3,300 years, is one of the most famous people in the world. A child pharaoh who died at 19, he lived from 1341 to 1323 BCE, during the height of ancient Egypt's glory. His legacy was secured when his tomb was discovered in 1922 by British archaeologist Howard Carter in the Valley of the Kings. And it's this discovery that's made him so well known, with his mask being one of the most recognizable pieces of ancient art ever made. But what really made Tutankhamun such a fascinating figure, and why does he continue to capture our imagination even today? Hi everyone. I'm here to answer these questions and many more in this series, where we explore the lives of those long dead. We rely on their material culture to help us understand how they lived and, in some cases, like Tutankhamun's, survived for thousands of years. If you haven't done so already, subscribe for new episodes every Thursday, and check out our other series, exploring everything from ancient Rome to the Viking Age. So let's get into Tutankhamun, a child on the throne. Tutankhamun took the throne at age 9 or 10, changing his name from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun after abandoning Atenism, the religious doctrine that his father, Akhenaten, had enforced. He restored the traditional Egyptian religion and moved the empire's capital back to Thebes. While much of his reign was taken up with undoing his father's religious changes, he did have time to complete at least one building project, restoring and expanding the temple complex of Karnak, which remains one of the most impressive ancient sites in Egypt today. Despite the scope of the building projects undertaken during Akhenaten's reign, there wasn't much building during Tutankhamun's short life. The reason for this is that unlike Akhenaten, Tutankhamun was a weak pharaoh. While there were advisors and regents who helped guide the kingdom during his minority, no vizier or chief minister held the power of Akhenaten. In fact, some scholars argue that during Tutankhamun's reign, the real power lay with his mother, Queen, who was also his wife. This arrangement, along with the young king's short lifespan, means that very little of his personal material culture has survived. The objects we associate with Tutankhamun, including the famous gold funerary mask, were created for his tomb long after he died. So why do we call them his? As with many aspects of his life, the answer lies with his tomb, discovered by chance. In November 1922, Howard Carter managed to squeeze through a narrow passageway behind a wall in the Valley of the Kings. The opening led to a large chamber containing not only Tutankhamun's sarcophagus, but also his treasures. With a total of over 5,000 items, the collection was far smaller than those of some of the other pharaohs buried there. Some scholars believe this was because Tutankhamun died young, and so did not have time to accumulate as much treasure. Others think that the bulk of his possessions were lost during a series of robberies that took place between 1100 and 1000 BCE. What makes the collection unique is that unlike other royal burials, almost all of the items were found intact, giving us a snapshot of what was once a typical royal Egyptian burial. The discovery caused a sensation around the world and prompted a media frenzy. Carter continued to excavate the site until 1924, uncovering many more artifacts and treasures. Because the majority of the collection was found together, it's easy to assume that each item belonged to the young pharaoh. However, archaeological finds don't always tell us exactly what we want to hear, and sometimes the evidence tells a very different story from the one we'd expect. This is definitely the case for the mask. Now displayed at the British Museum, the artifact is actually a later addition to the collection, having been crafted around 1000 BCE, nearly 1,000 years after Tutankhamun's death. Unlike the majority of the objects placed within the tomb, the mask wasn't buried with the young pharaoh, instead serving as the centerpiece of a new kingdom era memorial chapel built at Deir el-Bahari. It was only rediscovered in 1932, 10 years after the initial excavation of the Valley of the King's Burial Chamber, that the mask actually came from a chapel, and not the tomb itself. But why was a funerary mask depicting Tutankhamun needed 1,000 years after he died? Well, like many things from this period, the answer lies with the Egyptians' concept of the afterlife. For the Egyptians, the journey through the underworld was both physical and metaphysical. After the body had been preserved through mummification, the soul had to successfully navigate a number of obstacles. Funerary objects were often placed within tombs to assist the deceased in their journey, acting as offerings and providing them with what they would need on their travels. The most important of these was the mask, which was thought to contain the deceased person's soul or ka. By placing the mask, often made from the deceased person's own burial mask, inside the tomb, the deceased could recognize it and enter it willingly. Without it, the ka might become trapped forever in the underworld. These types of masks were often reused for this purpose, particularly those of famous rulers who were popular in the centuries following their death. However, what we call the mask today is actually just the base to which a thin layer of gold leaf was added during the reign of another famous pharaoh, Rameses II. This detail explains why it's housed at the British Museum in London today, having been seized by the British in 1881 after being smuggled out of the country. Originally, the mask was painted with vibrant colors, but unfortunately these pigments have faded away, leaving us with just the bare gold. Another iconic item in the collection is the so-called crook and flail, a pair of farming tools that symbolize the pharaoh's wealth and power. Unlike the mask, the crook and flail were contemporary items, having been placed in the tomb alongside Tutankhamun's remains. Even so, they don't quite belong to the pharaoh. Instead, they were likely placed in the tomb as part of a later tradition, in which the deceased pharaoh was shown tending to fields in the afterlife. This image reinforced the pharaoh's connection to the land and the people, and ensured that the land would remain fertile and prosperous. While the crooks and flails are thought to have been part of a larger offering to the dead pharaoh, the collection also contains several items that may have been personal possessions, including sandals, chariots, and even furniture. One of the most beautiful items on display is the so-called haka frame, a wooden panel decorated with inlaid ivory and precious stones. Created in the shape of a baboon holding a flower, the sculpture would have originally been attached to a larger piece of furniture. Today, however, it's impossible to say exactly what this was, because it was likely destroyed during the unwrapping of the mummy in 1826. As with any modern celebrity, Tutankhamun has inspired artists to create works in his image, but perhaps none have captured his spirit, quite like the 1932 Disney movie. Not only did it introduce many people around the world to the boy pharaoh, but it also played a huge role in shaping our modern perception of him. Although the film is largely considered to be a fun adventure, it also includes elements of Egyptian mythology, including the prophecy surrounding King Tut's death. This prophecy, which predicts that anyone who disturbs the pharaoh's eternal rest will meet an untimely demise, was incorporated into the film to increase the suspense. In reality, however, there was no curse associated with Tutankhamun's burial, although the deaths of several people involved with the excavation and study of the site in the years following the discovery did contribute to this rumor. Today, Tutankhamun continues to capture our imaginations, and several recent documentaries have brought new light to the excavations of the Valley of the Kings and the treasures that were discovered there. So, while the artifacts housed in museums around the world may not all belong to the young pharaoh, they do play an important role in helping us remember one of history's most famous children. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this episode, and check out my others to find out more about life in ancient Egypt. Thanks to our supporters, whose names you can see on screen. Now, see you next week.